Hi everyone, Rob from Total Try here. Welcome to my webinar on maximising your run potential. So just a little bit more about myself. So I work with elite triathletes in Loughborough on an everyday basis, and this will form part of this webinar. So I've got a few interesting videos that I've got to show you that will show you some of that sort of run technique. So yeah, so why did this sort of webinar come about? From a triathlon point of view, and especially sort of an amateur and age group point of view, I often see that athletes often focus on improving bike speed and swim technique, and there seems to be quite a lot of knowledge around these two aspects. But as we look at the run, there's potentially a little bit less here. So I think I wanted to address some of the common mistakes that happen with the run from a triathlon point of view. So understanding limiting factors to running performance. So there's obviously quite a few, and we're not going to be able to discuss everything today in this webinar, but I do want to sort of look at some of the more important aspects that maybe hasn't been widely sort of discussed. So one of the main ones is looking at run economy and how that relates to sort of functional movement and strength and conditioning, and also a little bit on the sort of physiology side, and a little bit on the neuromuscular development and power per stride. So how these aspects here link. Obviously the others are really important as well, but we're not going to be able to do everything on today's webinar. So yeah, so before we get into sort of the meat of it, I just wanted to show you this infographic that shows it was a US Olympics trials for 10,000 meters. So we've got the females on the left here, showing some pretty impressive times, sort of from 31 minutes to 33, and then the males on the right, sort of 27 minutes down to sort of 29 minutes. And it just shows the sort of different styles of how people land with each foot. And as you can see, there's many different ways that people do this, right from Galen Rupp at the top, where he lands slightly on the outside of his foot, toe first. And then we look down to sort of Jacob Riley here, who's still running very fast. He has a little bit of a heel strike. And then Christopher Landry here, also a pretty significant heel strike here, but he's running pretty quick. Same from a female point of view. Kellyanne Johnson, quite a heel strike here. And then there's quite lots of different ones like Lisa up here, who hands quite toe dominated. So basically there's loads of different ways here that people are landing with that heel strike, midfoot, outside of the foot and rolling in, toes first. So basically sort of the message from me is that it actually doesn't massively matter from an endurance point of view how you land, and there's a lot of misconceptions around that heel striking is bad, and it's not always bad. You can run extremely fast, even with a pretty significant heel strike. The point where heel striking can get bad is if people try to overthink running and try to overstride, and then they end up heel striking because they're landing too far in front, and that can cause them to slow down and more impact through the knee. But if you are running as a relaxed mechanical point of view, and it is your natural gait and natural style, then actually there are many different ways to be able to land. So I just wanted to show you this video. So these are 3 athletes at Loughborough. They're triathletes, and this is at the end of a pretty tough session in the middle of winter. So I think it was a 24 400s set that they were doing with limited recoveries, and this particular rep was at 10k pace, so pretty fast but not rapid, where you might see some people going around the track. So I think they were running around 74 pace, 74 per lap. So these guys are pretty quick. I think their 5k pace is around 14:30. So yeah, so this rep is at 10k pace. I'll show you in real time first, and then I'll show you sort of a few freeze frames, but we'll look at it as real time. Right, okay, so if I stop sharing there, I'm just going to take you over to iMovie so I can show you frame by frame. Okay, so generally these three have pretty good run mechanics. So their mechanics are pretty efficient. I say that they're pretty fast. But I just want to show you the lad in the middle who has very, very good run mechanics. So you see with his left foot landing, he's slightly heel strike, but not too much. He's landing relatively underneath him, just a little bit on the outside of his foot, and then he rolls inwards. Now, as we watch this left leg come through, this is a really good shot here, and you see how much extension at the back end that he gets. So his quadricep right at the top is very, very flexible. So it allows his leg to be able to come really, really far back in that extension flight phase. Now, because of the fact that he can get his knee so far behind him, it then allows his heel to then come upwards and then pretty close to his glute. Now, this is at 10k pace, so if he was running any faster, that would be right at the top here. But even at 10k pace, he's extremely close to his glute. And what that then allows is for that left leg to then have a really high knee drive and a pretty significant flight time. And he's not the tallest of lads, but actually his flight time and his distance per stride is pretty exceptional. Same with his right leg, so really good extension phase here. Again, pretty close to his glute, and then the drive phase is very good. You can also see as he lands, there is no hip movement or very minimal. And we've done videos before, we've looked at the front, and actually there's no hip movement at all. So everything's pretty stable in the upper body. So it allows all the sort of motion to be able to move forward. Okay, so yeah, so his mechanics are very good, and he has the ability without too much change to be able to run well under 14 minutes of 5k. Now, if we look at we'll focus on the lad at the back because of similar height. He's still a very, very good runner, and his mechanics are still very good. And he said he still runs well under 15 minutes of 5k. But there's some subtle changes that if he wants to run exceptionally fast, that he'll have to do to be able to do that. So as we see with this left leg, now the extension phase here is actually pretty good. Not quite as good as the athletes in the middle. We haven't got quite the range that we saw, but this sort of extension back here is okay. Because it's not quite as far backwards as the lad in the middle, the heel doesn't come quite as close to the glute, so that reduces the amount that he can lift his knee, and his flight time is then reduced. So we see a pretty shortening of a stride length, and he lands much sooner than the lad in the middle would do. So we know from this athlete, sort of I've done quite a lot of work with him, and we know that his top of his quad is really tight, and his hip flexors are also tight, so that limits the range of movement that he can do at faster speeds. You can also see as he lands that his glute does move outwards. So if we looked at a frontal point of view, the shock is taken through his glute, so that absorbs quite a lot of the downward pressure, so it doesn't allow him to then ping off the floor, and his ground reaction time because of that isn't the best. So there's a little bit of work to be done with that particular athlete on that aspect. The other things, the athlete at the front has similar issues to the athlete at the back. He's a bit taller, so he gets away with it a little bit, but actually his heel is quite a way off his glute. So he does have to, although he does have a good drive phase here, the flight time isn't that much. And even though the athlete in the middle is 5 or 6 inches shorter, he gets more distance per stride than the athlete in front. So the limiting factors here would be sort of tight hip flexors, potentially a tight lower back, and then also looking through that top of that quad. There is also some movement through his hip. Now, if we looked at a front angle here, we'd be able to see it a little bit more, but we can see with his glute that it comes out slightly. So he just doesn't get the ping off the floor like the athlete in the middle does. Right, sorry, I'll share my screen back to the PowerPoint. Okay. Okay, so what has enabled these runners to run so fast? Now, I say that there are a couple of things that they can improve on, but generally they're pretty fast runners, sort of well under sort of 15 minutes, and there's only a few minor tweaks that would be able to get them to run even faster. So they do a lot of easy mileage. So a lot of their running is very easy, but it's in a lot of mixed terrain. So they use a lot of hills and trails. And one of the reasons they use hills so much is one, for strength, that it really helps with their strength, but it also helps with their mechanics. So a lot of people think that hilly running, the benefits you get are actually running uphill, whereas I'd actually argue that most of the benefits are actually running down the hill. Because you can run faster with your heart rate a lot lower, it helps to improve your run mechanics, and it also helps you with the amount of force that you are contracting eccentrically as you land, that it also strengthens up the muscles of the glutes, the quads, and it just allows you to be able to take that force that you can then use for being able to run fast and on the track or on the trail. So yeah, it's one of the reasons why I like hills so much. They generally don't run that fast up the hills. If the heart rate is getting too high, they might even walk. I think that's something from sort of an amateur triathlete point of view that I think is, that you don't have to run up all the hills. Actually, if your heart rate is getting too high, that can have a bit of a knock-on effect to the rest of the week. So actually walking up the hills is fine. And then running reasonably quick down the hills, as long as your heart rate is relatively low, to allow the good mechanics. So that's one of the reasons why they do lots of hills. They do a lot of focus on the technical aspects of running. So pretty much every time they go out for a run session or a long run or an easy run, there'll be some aspects of drills, strides, S&C, mobility, focus on coordination and balance. So they might do some mobility before or after their run. They might do some drills again before the start of a run session, or they do it pretty much at the start before every run session, same as strides. We also do a 45-minute session just focused on these two aspects and the mobility. And then S&C is a lot of it's geared around being able to tolerate the run volume that they do, and strengthen up the areas that we need to be able to get them to run fast. So they do S&C specific session 3 times a week, and within that they do coordination and balance stuff as well, because if you want to run pretty fast, then having good coordination and balance is also key. They run at lots of different paces, so that can be sort of 400-meter pace where they do strides, although we won't do much of that, all the way to sort of almost walking pace up a hill. And one of the reasons why is that actually running at lots of different paces really helps develop your mechanics and you'll find your most economical way of running. So we do loads of stuff. So yeah, every single pace you can think of, we will do that probably within a month period. So yeah, this is a key aspect to being able to run fast. We make sure that the loading through with the running that is really consistent, and it's a little bit different from swimming and biking. With swimming and biking, you can get away with having sort of big peaks. So if you go away on a camp and you might do 20 hours of biking a week, you know, you can get away with that, and you might be a bit tired afterwards, but generally you're not likely to get injured. Whereas of running, if you did that, you are you know, in danger of becoming injured quite quickly. So the loading is pretty consistent, and we don't add on much each week if we are, say, coming back from injury, or the loading stays pretty similar year round if they're not injured. And yeah, the hours of running stays pretty similar. Even in the off season, we still keep some of the loading through the running, so they will never have a point where they're not running at all, because you know, that helps with from an injury point of view. So the run program's fairly periodized. That doesn't allow them to peak too fast. So one of the mistakes I see, sort of from an age group, amateur runner and triathlete point of view, is that they do a lot of hard run sessions year round, and that'll get you pretty fit pretty quick. So say if you did, you know, a park run on a Saturday every week for 6 weeks, then you're going to get fit, and those times are going to come down. But usually after sort of that 6 to 8 week period, you'll peak, and you won't see much change after that point. So we try and sort of eke out that ability to peak, and we do lots of sort of more endurance sessions where it will be a relatively low heart rate, maybe higher volume, and then towards the peak season, we'll do some faster stuff that allows them to peak. So it sort of draws out that peak, but then also allows them to run faster as well, so they don't get stuck at a certain pace. So I just want to explain this before we move on to the next point, because this will help you understand some of the things that I'm talking about. So this is a graph of blood lactate on the left, and at the bottom is exercise intensity, so heart rate. So as your heart rate increases, as you can see here, then it gets to a point where blood lactate starts to increase above base level. And we call this LT1, or your aerobic threshold. So it might be above 1 or 1.5 millimoles. It's sort of slightly different per athlete, but it's usually as it sort of rises above base levels. And then the blood lactate then starts to increase as heart rate increases, and then it gets to another point where your blood lactate will increase exponentially until the point where you can't run anymore, and that would be your VO2 max up here. And this point where it starts to increase exponentially, we call your LT2, or your anaerobic threshold. You don't need to understand that in massive detail. So from a running point of view, LT1 we would say is around your sort of marathon pace, and your LT2 would be around your 10K pace. Obviously, it depends on how fast you're running them, but as a guide, your 10K pace for LT2 and marathon pace for LT1. So as I was sort of talking a bit about the lads running and the fact that we have a pretty periodized run program, this is generally what it looks like. So from sort of October, January, after a bit of a recovery phase from the race season, we start by doing lots of sort of hilly tempo work around LT1 heart rate. So there's a bit of an under-over session, so that the heart rate might go up as you go up the hills, and it'll come down coming down the hills. But it's a relatively low lactate production session, and it's more around the sort of muscular conditioning. Then we also do a track session that focuses on mainly mechanics. So we do quite short reps at 5K pace. So it's nothing too taxing. So it's not a really fast pace, but it's relatively quick. And that's mainly to sort of develop the fast, relaxed running and mechanical development. We often say that actually, especially in this period, you should never finish a run session being absolutely beat or force the pace of a run session, because that actually helps you increase your run mechanics, and it also allows you to recover for future sessions in the week. So yeah, so the main bit for that is that it's just around the muscular conditioning and the mechanical development. Then from sort of February to April, there might be a bit more of a sort of LT2 conditioning, but still with a little bit of LT1 focus. and we'll start to introduce some longer 10k pace reps on the track with sort of 5k shorter reps. So it's still around the sort of mechanics, but it's sort of the LT2 development and efficiency that takes a bit of priority in this period, and sort of trying to get you a little bit ready to race. Yeah, so taking the muscular conditioning and the run mechanics and develop cardiovascular and muscular ability to execute racing in key race sets. So it's just a sort of a continuation from this phase. So we're not trying to peak here. We're just trying to sort of underpin the proper sort of mechanics and the muscular conditioning. Then from sort of May to September, we will put in some reasonably hard sessions. So it would be a specific, more specific race pace session. So we do sort of some sort of longer sessions on the track, and it can be down to sort of 3 to 5k pace. We might run a little bit quicker, and then we also do some 10k pace work, so around the LT2 development. So we might do sort of 30 to 35 minutes of that sort of work, and it's turning the building blocks you've developed into the ability to race. So it's that specific race block and that sort of sharpness, and that sort of, and because we've done such a good volume of sort of aerobic work, that'll allow you to peak, so sort of deliver your peak off the bike run performances. So yeah, some of the main point here is turning the physiology and mechanics developed in phase 1 and 2 into sharpness and race performance. And then sort of what underpins that, so these are sort of the sessions that we'll do, but what underpins that is your steady aerobic volume. So the easy sort of paces that they do, and they'll do quite a bit of easy running in the week, just so that develops the conditioning level underneath and underpins the ability to have the ability to be able to run fast. The other bits of that is sort of the drill and gym work, which supports all of the above and allows their bodies to tolerate the use of speed and more volume. So that drills and gym work are really key, one from an injury point of view, but also from a run economy point of view, which I'll go on to explain a little bit later. So yeah, so some common mistakes, some running mistakes that I generally see, and it's not just age group and amateur athletes, you know, elite athletes do this as well. And I often see it sort of on an everyday basis that it's to try and sort of get rid of, because these things will sort of negatively impact your running. So going too hard on an easy run, that's relatively easy to do and more easy than you might think. Now, when you go for a bike ride, generally you will sort of stay below that LT1 heart rate, relatively easy unless you're going uphill. But generally people will do that fairly easy unless you're sort of trying to force a pace. Whereas with running, generally over a period of time when you're running, so maybe, you know, over 10 minutes, your heart rate will start to increase. And especially if you start running uphill, that heart rate will get up pretty high and usually gets over LT1 heart rate pretty quickly. So yeah, so one of the biggest mistakes I see, and the reason why that's sort of bad is that it produces a lot of lactate, which causes a lot of fatigue, and you can become pretty one pace from that, because generally if you do that, you'll end up running at a pretty similar pace the whole time, and also it sort of has a knock-on effect to your run sessions, where you'll probably not be able to get the paces that you want out of it. Neglecting sort of strength, mobility, drills and strides. This is a sort of a key factor to be able to run fast and reach your potential. And I don't see that much from a sort of running point of view and a triathlon point of view of this happening as a sort of an amateur and age group. And I think this is one of the biggest difference that maybe separate elite and amateur athletes, is that there's a big sort of reliance on the strength work, mobility, drills and strides. And I said I'll come on to why that's important in a bit. Running in shoes that either aren't fit for purpose or are worn. I'll explain a little bit more about that later in the presentation, but that's something that I see quite generally, that people running shoes that are pretty worn out. And if you do that, you're more likely to become injured. Running after the bike. Now, obviously, this is a key factor in triathlon racing, and it's true that actually doing some brick sessions is good, but you don't need a massive block of it. And if you are going to run and bike on the same day, I would recommend you running before the bike, mainly from an injury point of view and from a mechanical point of view, that if you are running straight after the bike, you're going to be fatigued, you're more likely to pull a muscle or run with bad run mechanics, which can have a knock-on effect to your sort of injury status. So for me, it's a bit of a no-no. Obviously, if you are in a race block and doing some of the sort of brick work is fine, but generally, I would say run before the bike rather than after. And then this one, sort of going as hard as you can on every run session. Now we prescribe run sessions that pretty much most of them you shouldn't be absolutely all in at the end. There might be a couple that we'll do that should be pretty hard, but most of them you should feel as though you have some more reps in you, mainly so you can recover, but also from a mechanical point of view, that if you're really forcing the pace, your mechanics can sort of fall down a little bit. And also it's quite, you can get quite burnt out and quite fatigued if you are just maxing out those run sessions. And a hard run session is a lot more difficult to recover from a hard bike. So it's not quite the same at bike and run. And that's where I see a lot of the mistakes from a running point of view. Yeah, so why should I bother with gym, drills, strides, and mobility? So I get this sort of this question quite a lot, and it is really important, but I think it's important to understand why it's so important. Sorry, excuse me. So decreasing ground contact time is one of them. So drills have a really big impact on that, and that's mainly because it stiffens up the tendons. So if you do a lot of drills, it helps with that neuromuscular firing sequences. So that's down here on this one. So these two are quite linked. That if you can instill some proper mechanics by doing a lot of drills, then actually that will help decrease your ground contact time and install the proper neuromuscular firing sequences, which in turn improves mechanics. So drills are really important aspect for that. It's also important for sort of improving power per stride and flight time. So yeah, strides is really key with that as well. So running fast. And when I talk about strides, I don't mean sprinting. I just mean running fast over a short period with good mechanics, so relaxed running. Improve the range of movements was a show with the video of the three lads. The lad in the middle had very good range of movement. And one of the reasons is that the mobility sort of falls quite well into that. And it's not just flexibility. Mobility is being flexible under fatigue. So there's a lot of sort of more dynamic sort of movements, the sort of flexibility movements that allow you to be stronger under a sort of increased range of movement. It also improves your run economy. I said I'll go on to that in the next couple of slides, but that's a key aspect, and these things will help improve your run economy. It sort of helps improve your mechanical levers. So by doing the sort of strides and drills and gym work, you will find the most efficient way of running, and that will help you with your sort of mechanical levers. So these things are potentially more important for a triathlete than a runner due to running off the bike and it being under fatigue. So yeah, I mean, these things are really key, even as a runner, but as a triathlete, actually, if you find that you might be a good runner as fresh, but actually you struggle to run off the bike, well, potentially it's these things that you need to do more of. And also that is injury prevention. It just allows you to be able to do more running or injury-free running, which I see a lot of people who get injured from running quite frequently, and this stuff will really help with that. So yeah, I think it's important to discuss the sort of three physiological factors to run performance. So yeah, one of those is VO2 max. So a lot of you have heard of that, and that's sort of the maximum oxygen uptake that your body can take, so your aerobic ceiling. So how hard can you go aerobically? There's lactate threshold, so that would be LT2, so your anaerobic threshold, and that's the point where you start to produce or exponentially produce lactate. And then running economy, so this is the amount of energy needed to cover a set distance. So it's quite similar to VO2 max. So VO2 max is milliliters of oxygen produced per kilogram per minute, whereas running economy is milliliters of oxygen produced per kilogram per kilometer. So it's specific to looking specific to running rather than just looking at a physiological marker. So this is something that I think can be learned about from a sort of triathlon point of view, that you can sort of take to the next level, and something that I think not as many people will try to focus on. So I just wanted to share some physiological testing data with you. So these are two athletes' sets of data. Now they're relatively different. It shows their sort of VO2 max. Both have pretty high levels. So 65 is a very good VO2 max. But if we look at athlete B, he has an exceptionally high VO2 max of 82. Now, this is all well and good, but actually it's not the be and end all for an endurance athlete if their VO2 max isn't massive, and it doesn't mean that someone with a 65 VO2 max can't run fast or as fast as someone with an 82. It just means that that's your aerobic ceiling. Although it does help, it can impact on it. It's not the be all and end all. Now we look at running economy. Now you might understand with the sort of 223, it might have no significant meaning, and 215. These are okay, but we usually from an elite triathlete point of view, we want to look at that to sort of down to the sort of 200 mark or below, and even sort of age group athletes with a lot of running background can show that it could potentially be under 200. So that's something that these athletes could potentially work on. And then as we look at sort of the LT1 and LT2, now these are important markers. So we often refer them as a percentage of your VO2 max. So for athlete A, his LT1 is 76% or occurs 76% of his VO2 max, and then 88% of his VO2 max at LT2, and then 74, 73. Now, typically these don't go beyond 80 and 90%. So there is still room for improvement with the VO2 maxes that they have, especially more so for this athlete B with his massive VO2 max. There's loads of room for improvement as you sort of threshold. So, and even with athlete A, there is still room for improvement, especially sort of LT1 and even LT2. A 2% difference is still pretty significant. So these two athletes in particular, I'd probably look to more towards running economy and lactate thresholds improvement rather than looking at specifically VO2 max. So what sort of the factors that underpin run economy, and I suppose the main one is genetics, and then everything sort of fits underneath that. And it's sort of looking at different studies. It's one of the reasons why the East Africans generally have very low run economy, which allows them to run so fast. They're usually very light, they have long levers compared to their upper body, their calf distal area is pretty small, so it allows them to be more economical. So if you have generally larger calves, that can have an impact on your run economy. Also, if you're potentially a little bit heavier as well, that can also have a little bit of an impact. So the specific things we'll sort of talk about is sort of the biomechanical efficiency and neuromuscular efficiency, potentially how we improve these. So all these sort of underpins here, so around the flexibility, so the mobility, and then the neuromuscular efficiency. Some of the importance of there is the stiffness, force production, and specifically around the stiffness of the tendons. That's key to being able to provide a higher distance per stride and reduce contact time. And that's what I've said before around doing the sort of run drills and strides. And then also sort of around training history and sort of what that looks like. And some things you can't change too drastically, like the muscle fiber type is difficult to change. It's sort of how genetically you are made up. So there are some things that we can't change with run economy, but some things that we can focus on. So I just wanted to show you some data, some of Paula Reekers data from sort of the early 90s to the early noughties. So the graph at the top is showing her run economy, and then the graph below is showing her VO2 max. So as we see here, a reduction in run economy is what we're looking for. So from 92, 94 was when she was sort of a track athlete, sort of 10K. And her run economy is not bad. It's pretty good. Just over 200 is good. But actually, we see a significant decrease in that run economy, right to the point of 175 in 2003, which is when she broke the world record in London. Is a extremely low run economy and one of the lowest recorded European females out there. So yeah, she spent a lot of time looking at run economy and maximizing that impact to make her a more efficient economical runner. And then with VO2 max, there's not massive amount of difference over that 10-year period. It sort of fluctuated, mainly between sort of high 60s, 70s, maybe 75. Actually, we see a reduction in that VO2 max in 2003. So as I said before, it's good to have a high VO2 max, but it's not the be all and end all, and there are other things that we would look at before we'd want to move that VO2 max on. So she really focused on maximizing her run economy. So yes, how do we go about improving it? There's a few different ways. The sort of the key aspects is having that consistent mileage. The higher volumes of running will decrease that run economy, and you will naturally find the most efficient way to run. And the first rule of biomechanical change is that every conscious change you will negatively affect your running economy. So if you're a little bit of an overthinker and you're trying to think too in depth about how you look running or what you think your running should look like, or you've read something online and think, I should look like this, that can have actually a negative impact on your run economy. And I say you will find your most efficient way to run. So a little bit like the infographic I showed you at the start with the US trials, Olympic trials. They landed in so many different ways, and there's so many different ways that people look when they run. So actually, you will find that most efficient way as long as you have good consistent mileage and your volumes are reasonably high, and you're doing that at an easy pace. Plyometrics, so you improve the body's ability to release elastic energy out of the tendons, so you can run at the same speed but expend less energy. So that's around that sort of muscle and tendon stiffness, that ground reaction time. So the plyometric stuff can be S&C. The most plyometric thing that you can do is your strides, and then also your drills as well. So that's why that's so important, because it improves your plyometric ability. And then strength training, which sort of underpins everything that we do. It sort of helps you, makes you stronger, and ability to tolerate higher training volumes. So this will link in with the other two, that it will sort of help you manage that loading and allow you to be consistent and injury-free. Yeah, so I wanted to link this a little bit to the Nike Vaporflies, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, or sort of any carbon-plated sole. But specifically around these, because this is a lot of where the studies have looked at and where they found the most improved performance in terms of running shoe. So yeah, specifically around the 4% and the next percents. But what it means by 4% is that it's a 4% reduction in your run economy. So they will improve your run economy. So the percentage stated is the improvement run economy, and it can vary depending on the individual between 2 and 6%. Usually what we see is that those people who are less economical usually see a higher percentage change. I'm not 100% sure why, but generally you see a higher percentage change for someone who is a bit less economical. But yeah, these generally around the sort of 4% mark. They were designed for people running 3-minute Ks or faster. However, the improvement for slow runners is actually greater, mainly because of the speeds that people are running at, and because they can be generally less efficient. So some research has suggested it could be worth 10 minutes for a 4-hour marathon, which is pretty significant. And we think from an elite athlete running sort of under 15 minutes for 5K, that's worth sort of 20 seconds. So if you're running 14:30 and then suddenly you can run 14:10, well, that's a massive improvement, and that's something that shouldn't be overlooked. And generally, most elite triathletes now wear some form of carbon-plated shoe. However, they only last a pretty small amount of time, so 200 miles, so they'll wear pretty quick, and they're also detrimental if worn as a training shoe. So yeah, don't wear them as a training shoe, mainly because they do what your tendons are supposed to do for you. So if you're doing a lot of the drills and strides in these shoes, it will turn off your tendons a little bit, and it will stop that improvement. So it might feel good at the time, but you won't get the benefit from doing them, and you're sort of wasting your time if you're doing your training in these shoes. So having a flexible pair to do your drills and strides in your sessions is going to help with sort of stiffening up those tendons. And also, because they only last 200 miles, you're sort of wasting your money if you're wearing them as a training shoe, because they'll last pretty short period of time. They're also quite expensive. So just wear them for very key sessions, or just racing. Yeah, so a little bit about run trainers. So the main thing is to sort of finding the run shoe for you. So I definitely recommend getting a gait analysis, so you know whether you overpronate, or if you underpronate, or if you're neutral, so that you can find the right shoe that is fitted for your sort of gait, and that is really key. Most run shoes only last around 500 to 700 miles or 1 year. And after that point, so even if you've not worn them that much and they're over a year old, they will start to degrade, and there'll be more chance of injury. So having a pair of run shoes every year, especially from an injury point of view, is key. Rotating shoes has been shown to decrease injury by 10 to 20%. So having a pair maybe for flat running, maybe having a pair for hilly running, even having a pair for sort of fast running. A lot of elite athletes will do that. They'll rotate their shoes, so they have a little bit of a mix of a pair of shoes, and so that's been shown to decrease injury. If you are injury prone, then maybe stick with a brand that works. So if you know a brand that works for you, I'd probably try and stick with that particular brand, unless you know that their shoes are massively different between pairs, but generally they're usually quite similar. So yeah, stick with a brand that suits for you. As I said before, having a lighter pair of shoes for run sessions. That's not a race shoe, so don't use the carbon plate ones. Having a flexible, lighter pair of shoes will help with your run economy as well, because you're more relying on your tendons and ligaments to be able to do that. So yeah, having a lighter, flexible pair of shoes is good. Okay, yeah, so that's it from the presentation. If you do have any questions, then please get in touch. Yeah, my email is rob@totaltrytraining.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. I hope to see you soon. Thanks.